Since I was a little child, I have always had a strong trust in Jesus, which I acquired through my parents and from attending Sunday school. After some time has passed, I've come to the conclusion that these encounters were presents from God. Because I didn't want to be considered insane, especially at the rough school where I spent much of my formative years, I didn't share them with many people until very recently. I had no doubt that what I had been through was for genuine. I didn't tell anyone about my experiences until very recently, and I had no idea that there were so many people who had gone through similar things. On several occasions, I had the sensation that something was separating me from my body. This might occur multiple times during the night on occasion. On these rare instances, I would be completely awake in bed and have the sensation that I was leaving my body. When I look back, I was too little to understand that I had asthma or to comprehend the nature of the treatment that my mother administered to me. I would repeatedly stop breathing and leave my body, and then I would struggle to return to it and begin breathing again. My mother lost her fight with cancer just before I turned 12 years old. She had been battling the disease for nearly a year. I had a terrible fear that God was going to take her away from us, but I had a feeling that He was going to do it anyhow. I had the most incredible brush with death when I was 12 years old, not long after she passed away, and when I was still in mourning over her loss. One evening, not long after I had laid down in bed but was still wide awake, I began to feel as though my entire body was about to slip into full paralysis. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't move a muscle and I couldn't even utter a murmur. I was completely paralyzed. It was terrifying. I had the sensation of separating myself from my body, rising into the air, then descending down a very lengthy and dimly lit passageway. I had the sensation that I was moving at the speed of light as I approached the end of it, which was marked by a pinpoint of light. I became intrigued by the numerous little spheres of light that flew by me at a rapid rate, and as a result, when I switched my attention away from the light and to the side of me, I came to an almost complete halt. When I looked closer, I saw that the orbs were the souls of other travelers who were also going through the tunnel. I was able to make out their bodies and faces. They were not quite solid since I could nearly see through them to the other side if it weren't for the light that was around them. After shifting my attention to gaze ahead, I didn't have to wait long until I came to the dazzling white light that marked the end of the tunnel. I was floating down this gorgeous sparkling route rather than walking once I spotted it. At the very end of the path, I could make out a massive square building out in the distance. While this was going on, the souls of a great number of other individuals were swiftly passing me since I was moving at a slower pace than they were because I was trying to take in as much of the beauty as I could see around me. This trail meandered through such astonishingly gorgeous, vivid, green, grassy pasture. It was significantly greener than any pasture I'd ever seen on Earth. Everything was lighted up in such a brilliant way. The source of the light was this enormous building out in the distance. The light was so strong that it eliminated all shadows everywhere I looked. Everything was beyond my wildest dreams of beauty. When I was getting close to the building at the end of the route, I looked to my right and noticed a bush in the field just off the path that was on fire. It was an incredible fire, but it wasn't eating the bush. The focus of my attention then shifted to the area in front of me, where I noticed the most gorgeous flowers in a variety of eye-catching hues. As I continued to float deeper, my attention finally was drawn to the square structure. It seemed as if they were suspended in midair, completely still. As I got closer, I could see that the base of it was covered with a staggering number of the largest, most flawless and brilliant jewels in a rainbow of colors, stacked one on top of the other all the way around. I had never seen anything quite like that in my entire life, although I did get to see some of my favorites. I had no recollection of how many were in height or depth, but each stone was so enormous that it had to have weighted many, many tons in order to have fit exactly all around. As I looked higher, I observed that the walls that were situated above these precious stones were extraordinarily tall and expansive. I had the distinct impression that no evil could possibly permeate this entire location. It filled me with a profound sense of peace and security, and I had the impression that love in its purest form was radiating from every direction. The walls had a lustrous yellow-gold finish all over them. As I got closer, I was getting closer to one of its corners, and there I could see 3 gates on each side, all of which were quite far off from one another. I went around to the other side of the building and went up to one of the gates that was open. None of the gates were ajar more than approximately a 45-degree inclination from their closed position. When I first saw the gate, it struck me as the pearl that was the most brilliant, whitest, largest, and shiniest that I'd ever seen. At the time, I had the impression that it was polished marble. There is nothing else on earth quite like that. I came to a stand at the entry at the doorway as the souls of many other people continued to pass me by on their way in through the gate. The walls and the gate were both quite substantial. When I glanced at the ground within, it appeared to be made of pure, opaque glass. It was very polished but did not reflect light, and it was too opaque for me to see through it. This felt like home in every sense of the word. Because it was holy, I was not permitted to touch any of these artifacts, despite the fact that I did briefly but thoroughly study each one of them. As I stood at the entry to the gate, I had an immediate realization that Jesus was somewhere within the building, around the corner to my right, even though I could neither see nor hear him. I didn't feel ready to pass away, and I didn't want to leave my dad and sister behind in this world by themselves. I felt like I wanted to weep so terribly. If I went in, I was aware that there was no way out and that I would be required to remain. When I was up there, I learned all there was to know about everything that I may possibly be interested in learning about in my life here on earth. Something prevented me from crying or even shedding a single tear. I had no control over it. In heaven, there are no sad faces or tears. Only love and happiness may be found there. Suddenly, the angel of the gate arrived inside, who I was aware of while I was there. But when I returned to my body at a later time, all that I had known was erased from my memory. I don't remember if angels have a gender identification. My understanding came to me through an angel that we are aware of the identities of everyone, including every angel that was ever made at the beginning of time. This is due to the fact that God formed all of us back then, before we were finally sent to our mother's wombs to build our bodies. All of us came into existence at the same instant, in the very beginning. After the angel smiled, I was immediately overcome with a sense of serenity and tranquility, and the need to cry vanished completely. Even though it wasn't my time, the angel allowed me to return, but not before telepathically communicating with me about something. I got back home with a heavy heart and a sense of loss since my sister had passed away. I am unable to recall the words that the angel spoke to me, and it wasn't until quite recently that I realized why I was grieving for her. That information will remain strictly confidential. I discovered that in heaven everyone communicates telepathically because this gets around the language barriers that we have on earth, which originated with the building of the Tower of Babel. The direction you travel is determined by the direction in which your eyes are focused, and while we are in heaven, we know and remember everything, whereas on earth we were not meant to remember anything. It's all about having the freedom to make your own decisions. Time was invented by man and is only relevant to the current life that we are living. Time cannot be measured outside of our bodies. When I came back to my body, I was coughing and gasping for oxygen as I attempted to resume my normal breathing. The overwhelming happiness and exhilarating excitement I had in the days, weeks, and even months that followed are emotions that cannot be adequately captured by language. After some time had passed, as I was reading the Bible, I discovered that this location was not only heaven, but also New Jerusalem. Jesus has shown me a glimpse of my true home, and I cannot thank him enough for that. Over the course of my life, I have experienced a number of dreams, some of which have been terrifying, that concern the end times, or more particularly, the tribulation or the latter days. The majority were quite horrible and appeared to be completely fake. They are playing out right in front of my eyes now. The Bible, including the books of Daniel and Revelation, has an account of everything I went through and dreamt about. When it happened, I didn't comprehend why God was revealing all of these things to me or what I was expected to do with the information that was shown to me. My life began a downhill trajectory when I was in my 22nd. My ex-husband was an abusive, controlling, and manipulative alcoholic and drug addict who also abused my wife. I had a vision one morning when I was 25 years old, and it showed me the future. Years later, after reading the Bible, I came to the conclusion that it may be the rapture. I was awake and resting in bed when all of a sudden I had the sensation of a large yet loving hand reaching between my ribs and into my chest. It felt quite warm. I could feel each finger wrapping completely around my heart, and I knew that God was holding my heart in his gentle hands and calming it. Suddenly, I found myself being spirited away from my body. I suddenly found myself back in the city where I had spent much of my childhood, and I was strolling along the road behind my parents' house. The road was positioned next to a hill that served as a barrier between the road and the back lane, which was situated next to a row of residences. On the knoll, where there had never been a sidewalk before, I discovered a brand new one. It is important to emphasize that the brand new sidewalk had just been installed the summer after I had visited my parents, thus I could not walk on it. I continued going, and not long after that, I looked over to the other side of the hill and saw my dad strolling down the back lane there. He had a minor hunchback and carried a chair with him everywhere he went. He would walk a short distance before sitting down and doing it again and again. On most days, this route sees a considerable amount of traffic, but on this particular day, there were no cars or trucks to be seen anywhere. When I heard a disturbance, I turned my attention to the skies to see what was going on. After a period of darkness, which may have been caused by dark clouds, there was a great but frightening thundering and lightning, followed by one long monotone sound of a trumpet so deafeningly loud that it could wake up the dead and burst your eardrums, but it didn't hurt mine. After that, there was a great but frightening sound of a trumpet that could wake up the dead. After then, a chasm opened up in the midst of the sky, and it began to roll open like a scroll, with each half of the sky rolling in its own direction toward the north and south. Within that aperture was the light that was the purest and most brilliant white. The amount of light increased as it expanded up more. The light was so intense that it generally causes blindness. Nevertheless, it did not have that effect on me. In that light, I was able to make out the silhouette of a man in the distance, and I immediately recognized him as the person I was looking for. The focus of my attention shifted once again to my father, and I yelled out in a very loud voice, "Jesus is here." My precise words were, "The day of judgment has arrived." My dad neither heard nor saw me. Before he went away, he suffered from dementia, was so legally blind and almost fully deaf that he needed a walker to get around, and he was almost completely deaf. I then observed that there were a few of persons running and hiding in fright along the road and the back lane, carrying armfuls of valuables. The fact that they were trying to escape and conceal themselves from our compassionate Lord deeply troubled me. At the moment, I was unable to comprehend what was being said. When I looked up ahead of me, I saw the souls of people who had passed away, and then I saw the souls of others who were still alive being drawn up into the sky with me. This brought my focus back to the sky. Within the blink of an eye, I found myself standing in front of Jesus. He was dressed entirely in a long, dazzling, completely white robe, and something was fastened around his waist. His face was one of the warmest, nicest, and most peaceful and loving faces I've ever seen, and he always smiled. He had black hair that reached his shoulders, eyes that were blue-green, and his skin tone was similar to that of a Palestinian. My eyes then moved down to his outstretched arms, and when I looked at his hands, I noticed that the crucifixion had left wounds on his palms. I looked down at one of his feet, which was partially visible through the opening in his robe. The other foot was covered behind the first, and the hole in the arch was still present. A woman who I assumed to be Mary was standing to the left of Jesus. She wore a stunning, long, baby blue robe along with a shawl that covered her long, black hair, shoulders, and down her sides. I am unable to determine which Mary she was. I could sense the love and pleasure that was pouring from all directions. Next, I moved my focus to my side, where the majority of the people were congregating, and I joined them there. I had a vision of my late mother, who had died away while I was still a child. She seemed to have been transformed, as she smiled broadly and appeared to be quite a bit younger than she had been when she passed away. Whenever we got everyone together to perform a new song, I made sure to stand next to her. At that point, it came to an end, and I found myself returning to my body, struggling to take in oxygen while coughing and gasping for breath. My state of extreme happiness and delight persisted for a considerable amount of time, maybe many weeks, I don't recall exactly. To people who are in need or who are desperate, I know the following things to be true. Put your complete reliance and confidence in Jesus. You can depend on him completely. In the darkest times of our lives, he rescues us and brings us to new heights. Those who have faith in him get freely forgiveness, the ability to withstand hardship, love, peace, and joy. All they need to do is pray and ask for it. We are rescued by God's grace via faith, and whomever believes in Jesus Christ will not be condemned to hell but will have eternal life. Observations on life after death. I would want to express my gratitude to Linda for sharing her near-death experience and her vision of the rapture with us. Both of these things are reassuring to me personally. It's unfortunate that I have to say this, but whenever the name Jesus is brought up, there is always someone who wants to bring up the issue of race. It makes no difference to me if Jesus was colored any of the rainbow's spectrum of hues, including black, white, or purple. He is Jesus, and if you need to define him by a race in order to perform Christianity, then you are doing it wrong.